I'm Stuart Mandel, joined as always by Bruce Feldman. It is our week 2 reaction show. And Bruce, I always say this, and everybody says, oh, this is a light slate of games. I'm like, well, as soon as you say that, something crazy is going to happen. Now, I would not have expected it to be this exactly. USF goes to the swamp and knocks off Florida. We're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about Oklahoma, Michigan. Um, as we predicted, Mike Gundy did not enjoy uh, poking the bear with Oregon and much more. Okay, Florida USF, Bruce, I think is always going to be defined to me, even though it went down to last second walk-off field goal, by what our friend Matt Baker has affectionately referred to as bull spit. A guy spitting in somebody else's face, which is crazy because it was 2 days after Jalen Carter. And I feel like all
And
that
Jalen Carter, by
goodwill.
the way, didn't spit in Dak Prescott's face. He spit on Dak Prescott. It's kind of sad that we're having to
Yeah,
make
this one
that
was
distinction. This was pretty
this one
disgraceful.
was worse,
Yeah.
for sure. So I feel like all the goodwill that Billy Napier built up with his strong start at the end of last season, he's back. He's back on the clock, and um, I don't know what happens from here, given Florida's brutal schedule. This was supposed to be one of the games they won.
It was. And look, USF coming off a big win last week. They get out of the gate, they dominate Boise State, right? And that was impressive what they did. You look at this team, Byron Brown is a terrific dual threat quarterback. He doesn't turn the ball over. I mean, I think that was big. You see a team that Alex Golish has a program that he's resurrected. They were spinning their wheels for a while till he left Knoxville, went there. He's been an outstanding hire. You look at it, by the way, just a Brown now, 240 consecutive passes without an interception. That's impressive. Obviously, he's a good dual threat quarterback. I think defensively, they got after Florida, and now they have Miami coming up. It's the third ranked opponent in a row they're getting out of the gate. But we talk about like who's going to be the team outside the power conferences that's going to make a statement to try to make the playoff. Nobody's had a more impressive start, quite honestly, than USF. From the Billy Napier side, I mean, as somebody I was really impressed what they did last year, especially in the second half of the season. The team never threw in the towel. They I feel like they always had his back, and they finished strong. I thought this team, and I still think this team can have a really good year. Uh, but as you mentioned, the schedule now gets brutal. I mean, if you go through what they have coming up in the next, they got LSU next, and then it's just one, it's like the murderer's row of the next month. And it to me, it's like, how do they handle this? Because you're going to be lucky. I think they're going to be fortunate to split the next 4 games, and if that's the case, you're looking at 3-3 at midseason. It doesn't mean you don't have any playoff chances, but then it's looking pretty bleak. I think the challenge here for Billy Napier is to get this team. Like I said, he never lost the team last year, but that was such a disappointing, not just outcome, but when you have a player do that, where it's so costly and it's embarrassing, and honestly, it embarrassed the Florida program, it embarrassed Billy Napier. To move forward from that, I think is going to be interesting to see how they respond. Look, if they can they beat LSU last year. If they can go to Baton Rouge and win that game, I think that would be a good turn the page. If they don't, the buzzards are going to start circling again in Gainesville.
Yeah, I don't assume by any means that because they lost this game, they're then going to lose those 4. They've got Georgia a couple weeks after that. They can certainly win a couple of these games, but what stood out is DJ Lagway has earned a lot of respect. He was on everybody's toward the top of the Heisman lists and certainly our QB tiers on the Athletic, and he just didn't do much anything. I'd be lying if I said I know USF's defensive personnel. I did look up that they were 90th in the country last year, but man, that's the thing about these programs and the transfer portal. Like clearly they got a lot better. They shut down Boise State in week 1. They shut down Florida and DJ Lagway in week 2. I mean, you're right. They are clearly at the front of the pack now. Win or lose against Miami, like that's almost would be a bonus. Although if they do that, we might have to start talking about them as a, playoff regardless. You got it. The thing is, with the group of five, you got to win your conference, and I don't think we know yet what the rest of the AAC looks like. We know Tulane obviously clobbered Northwestern in its first game. They have Duke this week. But yeah, I mean, very impressed with what USF has done. Florida, I guess it's unfortunate. I wonder if the game hadn't. Here's what you don't know, right? Like, if the spitting thing didn't happen, this would still be a bad loss, but it wouldn't be, like you said, such an embarrassing moment. And frankly, and I wrote this in Final Thoughts, very reminiscent of the shoe toss. You go back to that game 5 years ago with Dan Mullen. Florida went to New Year's Six bowls in each of his first two seasons, and they were 8-1 to start that COVID season. Nobody was talking about firing Dan Mullen. And then a player threw a shoe, and they lost to LSU. And I feel like he never regained the momentum after that, and he was fired a year later. So that's not ideal. And you know what else is kind of daunting for Florida is that the SEC, some of these SEC teams are looking really good. Oklahoma, Michigan was the headliner game on Saturday. And I'll say this, John Mateer did not disappoint. We've been talking about him for quite some time, and he delivered, I thought. He wasn't perfect. And then Bryce Underwood had a rough night, but I don't know that that's totally unexpected, right?
It's not. I mean, look, this has been a really inept Michigan offense for the last year and a couple of months now, right? They couldn't complete a pass, it seemed like, last year. Underwood looked good against a undermanned opponent in week one in New Mexico. He didn't have probably his best receiver, Marlon Klein, who's a big athletic tight end, who was good in the opener. He wasn't able to go yesterday. You had one big run by Justice Haynes, the Alabama transfer. The thing, if I was a Michigan fan, I'd be a little concerned about is because I think Bryce Underwood's going to be fine, more than fine. I think he's going to be terrific. But the offensive line feels like it has slipped a little bit. It went from being great when they had these Joe Moore award-winning O-lines, when quite honestly Sharon Moore was handling it, and now I think in the transition he's Grant Newsome is a younger promising coach who stepped in, and I think he was the tight ends coach before. But it was like the makeup of the room and some of the stuff. I don't know if this is one thing to just keep an eye on if you're a Michigan fan a little bit. I mean, Jim Harbaugh, the way they practiced, guys got better at football. You can say what you want about Jim Harbaugh. He's a really good football coach. And I think if you're a Michigan fan, I think you watch that game a little bit and you're hoping they were better than us in the trenches, right? I get it. It's a tough road environment. It's a night game. It's against a talented team, and you're playing a true freshman quarterback, right? It's his first real big test. But I think there were some other signs that were a little bit concerning, right? But I would say this: they didn't get blown off the field either. Two areas though that I feel like they have got to get a lot better at is at receiver and certainly on the O-line. And as far as Oklahoma, to me, John Mateer has been as advertised. We've been talking about him a lot on this podcast, really for over a year. I mean, he generated a lot of buzz. I wrote a big story about him last week, just about how he got to where he got to and his really kind of unusual recruiting process. I think Ben Arbuckle is going to prove, and he's already starting to show, that was a terrific hire for Brent Venables. He did a really, really good job everywhere he's been. He's a 29-year-old offensive coordinator. His offense, has some air raid stuff, but he comes from, a little bit of a different way about it because they do so many different, formations and motions and shifts. It's a lot of different personnel groups. We really haven't seen, Jaden Knott wasn't really much of a factor, the Cal transfer. But I like what I've seen from Oklahoma. I know a bunch of people. I know Ralph was very high on the Sooners coming in. It's obviously it's always thick and loaded in the SEC, especially considering how bad OU was last year. But if I was a Sooner fan, I feel really good. I mean, there's definitely some Baker Mayfield vibes about Mateer. Um, and now let's see how they build on it.
Yeah, that was exactly the comparison I was going to make, with Mayfield. For people who didn't see him at Washington State, what I was saying was, or telling people was, yeah, he's a good passer, no question. But what makes him so dangerous is he can escape. He can escape pressure. There was a play where, there was a Michigan defender was blitzing him, was right in his face. He shook it off. He rolled out 30 something yards down the field, right on the money. And then, he ran for a lot of yards. So it's dangerous. It's dangerous when you have a quarterback that can do both. And then, of course, you always figured Brent Venables was going to have a great defense. He did it every year at Clemson. It took him a couple of years to get it going at OU, but certainly I think they've got it now, given what they did last night. And so when you combine the two, Oklahoma can be night and day better than they were last year. They do have a pretty rough SEC schedule, but they might have the SEC's best quarterback. We'll find out. Now, also in the SEC on Saturday night, we had an upset I truly did not see coming. Mississippi State beats the defending Big 12 champ ASU. Mississippi State was terrible last year, just terrible. Now, Blake Shapen, their quarterback, was injured most of last year, and he looked great. I thought, Bruce, it was so impressive when ASU fell behind 16-0, came all the way back, goes ahead with about a minute and a half left, and Shapen just turns around and throws a 59-yard touchdown pass. The cowbells are clanging. The field is being stormed. Great win for Mississippi State. Really bad loss for the Big 12. I feel like this is the dilemma going forward for this conference, where we know they're not the SEC and Big Ten. So when they get their chances against the SEC and Big Ten, they've got to do something, and they certainly can't lose a game like that. The Big 12 had a couple good wins on Saturday that we'll get to, but you can't lose that game.
Yeah, it looked like Sam Levitt, who's a really talented quarterback, still pretty young, but looked excellent last year. It looked like he was really struggling early. Had some really bad misses. He played a little better in the second half, but the first half was awful. As much as Cam Scatteraboo was a phenomenon last year, ASU actually ran the ball really well. They had multiple 100-yard rushers last night. I think they ran for 260 yards. That wasn't the issue, right? And as you mentioned, Mississippi State hit a bunch of big plays. Brennan Thompson, who's one of my freaks list guys, one of the fastest people in college football, started his career, by the way, Sooner fans will remember, he played, I think, 3 years for the Sooners. Little receiver, hit a couple of big plays, including the game winner. I don't know how far Mississippi State can go, but they're definitely much better than they were last year. And as far as ASU, this was definitely a gut punch for the Big 12, right? To see your preseason favorite look like that against one of the worst teams in the SEC on a big stage, because that was, the other game people were really started to tune into, because it was because Mississippi State jumped all over them. Now, you also, I think you alluded to this a little bit, last week, Baylor, who had a nice win against SMU yesterday in a wild shootout, where they were never leading until the end of the game in double overtime. But they lost at home to Auburn. Again, Auburn wasn't a great team last year either. And so when you take, because I think Baylor's one of the better teams in the Big 12, you start looking at some of the things that are happened here. We'll work up at this point. K-State, really disappointing start. They lose a close game to Iowa State in Dublin. That's totally understandable. They barely survive an FCS opponent in week 2. And then they get mauled by Army. And remember, this is the Army team that lost to FCS Tarleton State the week before, right? And there were some wild stats in this one, it just to show how, this is the kind of stuff that I felt like K-State typically does to other teams. I'm just going to go through this. So Army outgained them by over 100 yards, but the big kind of eye-opening thing was Army ran 82 plays, K-State ran 43. that's like an insane difference right there. Um, so you have, K-State, honestly, 1-2. They're going to play Arizona on Friday night this week. They have been right now a big disappointment so far, given the expectations on them. We mentioned Arizona State. I think, like you look at some of the other parts of the Big 12. One really good win that they had yesterday was in Cyhawk, where Iowa State is now 3-0. They beat Iowa. It was, I think it's an impressive performance by their defense. Although I kind of wonder, looking at this, is like this felt like really bad Iowa offense still,
Oof.
right? Like I thought Mark Gronowski was going to be a big jolt for them, and he looked really shaky as a passer in week one against an inferior opponent. Did not look very good yesterday throwing the football either. And as promising as the first season of Tim Lester as the offensive coordinator was for Iowa, this year they look like they've regressed because they don't have Caleb Johnson to like really lean on to run the football. I mean, you were a guy who was pretty high on Iowa going into the season. How do you feel about that now?
Not one of my better predictions to have Iowa in the playoff. I blame Scott Docterman. He had me convinced that Gronowski was going to be, the second coming of Brad Banks, and that has not happened. But it's a testament to Matt Campbell. Iowa State has traditionally not done well against Iowa. They've won 3 of the last 4. They've traditionally not done well against K-State. They've won 5 of the last 6. And obviously they're coming off an 11-win season. So that program is in a really good position right now, for sure. But in terms of the Big 12 overall, they also had a really nice win yesterday. Baylor coming back and beating, one of last year's playoff teams, SMU. Sawyer Robertson putting up huge numbers in that game. But you get measured against what we now call the Power 2. And so far, the Big 12's played 7 games against the SEC and the Big 10, and they've won 2. So 2-5 in those games. And one of those 5 was our guy Mike Gundy losing 69-3 to Oregon on Saturday. He poked the bear. I would not recommend that, obviously, but I think Oregon would have done something like that regardless. I want to get back
I don't
to
think
the
it would have
SEC.
been. I don't think it would have been as bad. Like, let's stay on Gundy for a minute because we're talking Big 12
Yeah.
here. We had Justin Williams, who did an outstanding, in-depth story on what's going on at Oklahoma State on Friday, and I asked him this question, and I framed it to you guys as well. Like, does Mike Gundy need Oklahoma State right now a lot more than they need him? It's only 2 games into this year, but last year they were 3-9. We know, and again, in Justin's story, you can read all about the details behind the scenes of what really went on there. That was it. That was one of the most lopsided, power conference matchups you will ever see. It was 69-3 in the third quarter. Like Oregon didn't even score in the fourth quarter. And you wonder, like, it doesn't do them any good to fire Mike Gundy. By the way, Mike Gundy did such an overhaul on his staff. Almost everybody, who came in there now are all his guys who are new guys. But if I said to you, give me a percentage on this, what percent do you think it is that this is Mike Gundy's last season as the head coach at Oklahoma State?
80. Because I don't see a team that lost 69-3 turning around and winning 9 games, right? Or even 8 games. I mean, frankly, even being a bowl team. I mean, I do think back to a couple years ago when they won. When they went to the Big 12 title game and they lost. Was it South Alabama that they got crushed by early in the season? Like they lost a lopsided game. I think it was South Alabama. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then he made a QB change and they turned around and had a good season. But this wasn't just the QB. This was everything. Now, did you see his son Gavin's tweet storm after the game defending his dad? I mean, it was epic. But the thing is, everything he said is true. Like he is the best coach probably they've ever had. Plus, he was a star quarterback before that. Like he has done so much for Oklahoma State football. And there is a bit of a be careful what you wish for if they do fire him. Like there's no guarantee or there's no template for any other coach coming in and winning at that consistent of a level. But if it's this bad already, that's really hard to turn around from. Mike Gundy made one really puzzling decision in the offseason. Todd Grantham, really? That's your DC that's going to come in and be the savior? How many different places did he get fired from?
Stu, the thing is, I mean, you have a coach who is really on a hot seat there. And I'm not sure how many different, remember, this is a guy who's gone in a lot of different unconventional methods. He
Yeah.
hired Brian Nardo, who was at much smaller schools, hadn't been there, had been a guy people thought highly of. But I think it's, you're trying to thread a needle here. Again, you're going somewhere where you know that if you do not win, you're getting fired. And it's also you're pretty much bringing in guys who are going to bring probably their own defensive staff, which is largely what it seemed like has happened there with Grantham. I mean, I think this is much bigger than who his defensive coordinator is. The thing, everything you said about, yes, be careful what you wish for. I think the challenge here is like, and I brought this up the other day on our show, is Mike Gundy at this point, the way college football runs and all the factors that go into it, I don't want to say he's a dinosaur. I'm not saying that, but just because there's plenty of coaches who are certainly older than him, but maybe they are a little, I don't say more flexible, but just have a kind of evolved more with how things have changed to be able to manage how they are and also still stay true to who they are. Because a lot of stuff has changed. It's much different than it was, in 2018 or in 2015, or quite honestly, even in
2023.
yeah,
It's changed that quickly.
it has changed a lot. And I think that, the comments didn't help going in because it just felt like felt like there was excuses coming before the beatdown came, and so I'm interested to see how they try to pick up some of the pieces. They still have some talent there, but if they go 5-7,
They
even if they
do?
go, what's that? No, I think there's some good players there. This is not like, again, to me, you're in the Big 12. The gap between them and the gap between Iowa State, I don't think that's personnel. I think that's
That's true.
development. That's development. I'm not.
And
I'm not
that's
saying
the thing, Bruce. Yeah,
if
the
you did
the
if you did
Gundy.
like Bud Elliott's blue chip ratio, I don't know that Iowa State and Oklahoma State are going to be dramatically different, but I think it's development and I think it's the culture that's set, and it's hard to have that. I think it's challenging. It's hard to put a finger on it, but I think sometimes you see it when you see the product on the field.
The transfer portal has helped some programs, it's hurt others. I think it's definitely hurt Oklahoma State because you just use that phrase developmental program. There's a lot of those in the Big 12, right? There's a lot of schools that have to kind
You
of
have
punch
to be.
above.
K
Yeah.
State was that. You pretty much have to be in that conference because
And
you're
I
not
would put
winning
it
a lot of battles to get 4 and 5 star guys.
and I would put Oklahoma State, that's what they did too. Now it wasn't what when you think of like K-State or Iowa State, it was a different kind of athlete. Mike Gundy was great at going and finding a Justin Blackman or frankly like all these great skill players that came through there. Chuba Hubbard, right? Like none of these guys were 5-star recruits.
Hubbard was up in Canada, right? So
Right. But you had the luxury of developing them, right? You had the luxury of they come in high school and they're going to be there for 4 years. Hubbard turned pro, but you know what I mean. You don't have that luxury anymore. And so I think a huge difference, right? A huge Iowa State, as I'm thinking this through, one of the things that Matt Campbell is probably doing better than almost anybody is retention. Like they're not developing guys and then those guys are fleeing into the portal. But Oklahoma State's not faring as well. Um, it's not looking like it's going to end well for Mike Gundy. One of those other Big 12 SEC games was Border War. It was great to see KU and Missouri back on the field for the first time since 2011. Little trivia question, Bruce. The only time I got my name on the cover of Sports Illustrated was when I covered that 2007 2 versus 3 game with Chase Daniel beating Kansas. Um, Wait,
I
what was I
almost
going to say? That was
that's
random.
that was Todd Reesing he beat, right?
Yes.
I almost said it was
I
like when he played Todd Graves, but I don't think he played the founder of Chick-fil-A. So
I just
it's
remember
been a
that was
minute.
I used to, when I would cover a game, I used to jot down every play in a notebook. People would say, why do that? They print it out and send it to you. But it helped me stay engaged in the game. And that was the first time, that was when these breakneck hurry up offenses were starting to become more commonplace. And that's the first time I remember I just couldn't keep up. Anyway, Jalen Daniels, your man crush, kept KU in that game into the fourth quarter. Thought they might pull the upset, but their defense could not stop Missouri. Missouri ends up winning 42-31. Great game for Bo Prabula, the Penn State transfer. And so I bring this up as a way to say, we touched earlier on Oklahoma's good win, Mississippi State's good win, Florida not so much. I think the SEC has played a lot of meaningful non-conference games these first 2 weeks, and to give us, obviously LSU, Clemson, to give us an early impression of these teams. What are some, I don't know, changed perceptions you're having in terms of how the SEC race might play out?
Yeah, so the elephant in the room is the elephant, right? I know Alabama slaughtered ULM
Yeah,
yesterday and you know, Ty Simpson goes 17 of 17 and everything. That you unless they lost that game, nothing was going to change perception wise of, what Alabama needs to do and where they need to be. To me, that's the one that's like the one that was where your knees buckled. Like nothing I saw week one in Columbus from Texas changed how I felt about them. I thought
oh,
they would lose
interesting.
that game. No, I thought they would lose that game. I thought it was going to be because again, four new starters. It's a first road test, big game for Arch. There was just a lot there to sort through. Now, yesterday, he and Texas, shredded San Jose State, and San Jose State looked like they did not belong on the field. There were wide open receivers. There was tons of time. At one point, Arch ran through the Spartans defense as if he was playing back at Newman High in Louisiana, right? It looked easy, but they're going to have basically three cupcakes in a row. They got UTEP next, and then it's Sam Houston before the schedule gets dicey again. So you wonder, you know, and I had this conversation with Chris Peterson yesterday in studio about how much can you take from a game like this where they just destroy an undermanned opponent. And while it's good for everybody's confidence, especially with a lot of new starters, three games in a row, he's like, you got to play what's on your schedule. But three games of that caliber is a little bit concerning in terms of like, how, do you lose the speed of the game you need to be at, right? In terms of that, you can operate, but those are some things that are, kind of noteworthy. LSU obviously had a huge win right out of the gate at Clemson. That was impressive. Now, yesterday they kind of sputtered around against Louisiana Tech. They ended up winning, but it was like less impressive than I think, if you're an LSU fan, you were hoping. And you got to hope that a couple of key players, including your starting center, who got banged up in the game, and I think they have MRIs today, they're going to get good responses from that because you can't really afford to lose a starting center from a rebuilt offensive line. I can't read too much into Georgia putting it on Austin P. You can't read too
They didn't
much.
really put it on Austin P,
No,
but
I know.
yes.
Yeah. I mean, but it's like I felt like you can't say a ton. For me, it's like, okay, Oklahoma has looked as good as we thought they would. Some of us thought they would early. Again, the LSU win was a huge one. To me, that's the headliner of it. And then it's, what's up with Alabama, obviously Florida. That's a really tough loss for them. And I'm curious to see how they come out of it. Anything really kind of like, I'll be honest, one other thing that we watched a lot of um, Ole Miss at Kentucky after Kentucky, went to Oxford and beat them last year, and that was a really bad Kentucky team. And basically, that had as much to do with Ole Miss missing the playoff as anything. I really thought Ole Miss was going to shred them, and they really didn't. It was a touchdown game. I don't think either one of us feel like Ole Miss is as good as they were last year, but I just expected them to just kind of really thump the Wildcats, and they didn't.
That game was pretty ugly, to be honest. Like, neither quarterback was good. Zach Calzada, I don't know how that was the smartest pickup for Kentucky. So as I think through it, I think one thing is I picked Texas before the season. I don't feel like that's the favorite, or they might still win it, but they're not like a
Do
clear
you regret
favorite by
that
any
pick?
means.
Do you regret that pick?
I don't regret it, but I think um,
Little buyer's remorse, a little.
yeah, a little biased. I mean,
Come on,
after
Steve, stay
after I
with
was the
it.
most well, I was the most critical of the three of us like about Arch after the first game, so I'm a little
By far.
hesitant to keep nitpicking him. But those first two touchdown passes were behind the receiver, like they weren't.
Oh,
Oh my
stupid.
gosh, look at those throws! But then he was he was really good from there. I don't like you said. I don't think you can take much from the San Jose State game, but certainly LSU is either the front runner or the co-front runner at this point. I'm not ready to put Oklahoma in that group yet, but they certainly had a promising start. Um, with Georgia, I'm interested to. I mean, Georgia goes and plays Tennessee this week. I think that's a game people will expect them to win. If they don't, you might start to get concerned there. Um, the reason I knew they didn't put it on Austin P was because that was a game that I just happened to catch. Somebody sent me some stats from that game. Gunner Stockton, basically about half of his pass attempts were screen passes. Screen passes are 5 yards or less. He was not throwing downfield. I don't know if that was just an Austin P thing. We don't want to show our cards, or that's a sign of things to come. I mean, I guess the question is, in Mississippi State, I feel like results like that are not out of nowhere. I don't think Mississippi State beats the defending Big 12 champ, turns around and goes 2-10 again, right? Like they're not going to. I don't think they're going to win the SEC, but they could certainly be a lot better. Missouri as well. I'm just like, well, who's not going to be good? I mean, they can't all be on the upward trajectory. And so yeah, Ole Miss didn't. I mean, I'm not really sure why they were ranked in the preseason. They don't have anybody back. They didn't look like a top 25 team to me. Um,
I think there's a
I
little
think
bit of a nod to Lane Kiffin on that, and the little we saw from Austin Simmons against Georgia was really impressive. So, and the people that you tend to talk to inside the program are like, yeah, Austin Simmons is a dude. He's super smart. He's super talented. Was a former baseball player, super talented. You could see him blossoming to be a really prolific quarterback in the Lane Kiffin, Charlie Weiss Jr. offense. So I kind of get why there was some love for Ole Miss, um, to at least have them ranked, right? And I wouldn't write them off. By the way, while we're talking about like mulligans and preseason picks or whatever, I was trying to keep you on to stay on to Texas while I'm like very on my pick of I win
your
Sunday
national
Clemson
title
pre.
pick.
Yeah, I picked Clemson to win the national title in the preseason. They were down 16 to Troy, and Troy's not very good as a much less as a group of
I
five
thought your
team.
national title pick was going to get eliminated in halftime of week two. I thought they might get eliminated right off the bat, and they came back and won. But I take it you're not feeling that
I
pick anymore.
regret that pick. I regret that pick, right? So I still think they can have a really good year. I just think a lot of stuff is troubling offensively. I get it. Like the run game actually, Adam Rendell, converted running back, um, runs hard and he's an interesting player. They're still missing their best receiver, but like I do worry about like offensive line isn't as good as I thought it would be. Klubnik hasn't been as sharp as I expected. Again, it's early. It's like again, I don't want to pivot off of where you wanted to go here, but like I
No, that's
wouldn't read
fine.
it. I wouldn't read a ton into, Florida State blew out a really bad team, but man, they're playing with a ton of confidence. Like Deuce
Wait, wait, wait. You've
Robinson.
already declared Alabama to be a really bad team.
No, 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 no. I'm
Oh,
saying
sorry.
yesterday,
Yesterday, East
yesterday,
Texas A&M. Yeah.
East Texas A&M. Yes, um, they're a bad team. Like, or they shouldn't be on the field with Florida State. And you just watch some of the stuff. Um, Thomas Castellanos is a playmaker, and I think he's a really good fit in the offense. Deuce Robinson does some dominant stuff. It was again, I won't read too much into a week two, but there was like, oh, we're just going to keep our foot on the gas here, and it's kind of interesting to see what the ACC race looks like because now Both playoff teams from the ACC already have one loss, and neither one's look particularly good, to be honest. SMU, and I know we talked about this a little early on, SMU's defense lost a lot of good players, and Baylor shred them. Sawyer Robertson shred them, and they gave up a bunch on both ways. So I don't know. Like the ACC is kind of interesting into itself, just because maybe the Florida schools are the teams to watch out for at this point. I don't know. It's kind of interesting how that one is like feels like it's really up for grabs.
Well, you love to play the percentage game, so I'm going to throw one at you. ACC title pick. Percent chance Clemson wins the ACC.
20%.
Wow, you've
25%.
gone way down the list. Miami.
I would say 40%.
By the way, listeners, we know full well that when we do these games,
it's not going to add up, because you're going to ask me Florida State, and I'm like, I know. I'm going to give you like 200% of an answer.
Yeah, no, right now I'm not sure how you're going to get to 100 unless you want to throw a ton of big number.
I'm going to know Florida State's no, but if I do Miami at 40 and Florida State at 30, that's 70, and I give you Clemson at 25. I don't know where I would. I didn't like what I saw from Louisville the other night. It's hard for me to get in. I'm not. Duke got lit up yesterday.
Wait, so you're at 95. Do you want to give the other 5 to Georgia Tech? Are you spreading it around?
I would give maybe 4% to Georgia Tech. I'm not giving anything to Virginia Tech at this point.
1%.
Maybe I'll give 1% to Narduzzi. I don't know.
Yeah, that's who I was thinking.
Narduzzi has fun players there. I'll give them that, and they have the best uniforms, I think, in college football. So
I mean, again, this is overreacting to one game, but that's what we do. But yeah, from what I've seen of Clemson so far, and then from Miami beating Notre Dame, Miami would be my ACC pick right now, but it's a long season ahead.
Where are you on Florida State? I'm sorry.
I think they're gonna. I think they're gonna be good.
I know you were down on. I'm gonna re-tee this up. At one point, you were like, they're more likely to be 3-9 than 9-3. I know you've come off.
I already got that wrong.
But
here's the thing, Bruce. I mean, there's always that one game in week 1 or more, I guess, but a game where it's just like, oh my gosh, what an amazing win for this team. And then it turns out the team they beat wasn't very good. We talked earlier about all these, Oklahoma we think is going to be better. All these SEC teams that look good. So it's hard to look at Alabama and go, and they're going to be one of them, right? It's possible that Alabama is the team that falls back. So that's the only thing. Like, I still think Notre Dame is going to be really good. That was a big win for Miami. Clemson is concerning, but I know it sounds like you've gone off that bus more so than I have. So give me a couple weeks to see how I feel about Florida State.
Okay.
Now we've reached the part of the podcast where we do America's favorite podcast segment, Player Who Impressed Me the Most.
For me, Stu, I was in studio. We had Colorado on our air. They played Delaware, not obviously a hefty opponent, but it was interesting to watch the game plays out, because we knew Juju Lewis, who was a big, huge quarterback recruit, who for a while was committed to USC, ended up at Colorado, was expected to play a lot. So Caden Salter put up big numbers at Liberty. He was the guy last week. He actually looked pretty good in the first couple of series, and then Juju Lewis went in, and it wasn't like he was bad. But the game is still relatively close. And with a minute left, Ryan Staub comes in. So now it's the third quarterback Dion has played in the first half, and none of the other substitutions are injury related. It's not like one of the quarterbacks that got knocked out. Staub, as you might remember, was the backup last year to Shador. And he was a Sean Lewis recruit in the first, really the first full recruiting class that Dion had there. And the first or second pass he throws almost gets picked off. You're like, oof, this could be, disastrous. But then he ends up lighting it up and leads them to a touchdown drive, and then plays really well in the second half. And in the post-game interview, Dion loves him up. Like, he's with him, with our sideline reporter at the same time. And you could just feel like kind of the love that Dion has for him. And it's a funny clip. I don't want to, spoil, ruin how exactly he said it, but there was just some, talking about what it means going forward in terms of the quarterback battle. And the thing that impressed me most is this. In this day and age where guys jump in the portal all the time and kind of get their feelings hurt and just make a lot of knee-jerk reactions, here's a guy who was the backup. He was a redshirt freshman quarterback last year. Was the backup to Shedeur Sanders. Colorado brings in a very successful quarterback in Caden Salter, and then they also bring in a huge recruit that was a big headline get, both at his position and his room. Nobody is talking about him. Not only that, they brought both of those quarterbacks to Big 12 media days. That almost never happens where you bring two quarterbacks, much less one of them is a true freshman, who, by the way, should still be in high school because he graduated early. Ryan Staub did not leave. He stayed, and you could see how much his teammates, really were fired up for him and the spark he brought. So that was what impressed me most yesterday.
Yeah, that's a good one. So opposite Oklahoma, so you had on prime time on Saturday night, you had obviously Oklahoma, Michigan, and then the Mississippi State game opposite that became a big one. Quietly over on NBC, Boston College and Michigan State played this crazy shootout that ends up going to double overtime, and Michigan State wins 42-40. And Aiden Childs was great, right? The Michigan State quarterback. But I kind of always thought he would be ever since Oregon State. The one that really wowed me and caught me off guard, Dylan Lonergan, Boston College's quarterback, the transfer from Alabama, goes 34 of 45 for 390 yards and 4 touchdowns. I feel like, if that's what BC's offense is going to be this year, is him like slinging it downfield. First of all, did not expect that from Bill O'Brien, but also like, I don't know, has BC had a quarterback like that since Matt Ryan, who played there 18 years ago?
Yeah, it's interesting. I watched a lot of that game last night, and I thought Aiden Childs was his best game because he took care of the football. It's a big win for Jonathan Smith in year 2 at Michigan State, but that was a fun game. It was a good, I hate to say it like this, where it's going to feel like it's a dig at both schools, but it felt like it was like a good middleweight fight where both programs feel like they're on similar footing, where they're teams that should get bowl eligible, but coaches still pretty early in their tenure, coaches who are pretty well respected by their peers, and two quarterbacks who are at a point where it's like, okay, we need to see them take a big step up. And obviously Dylan Lonergan was at Alabama for a reason, and so I don't know if I was a BC fan, if I'd feel great about losing to Michigan State, much less anybody in the Big Ten. But
I think you might be selling Michigan State short. I don't know yet, but I mean, I think we both have a lot of respect for Jonathan Smith. We both had a lot of respect for Aiden Childs, so it wouldn't surprise me if they were 5-7 in his first year if they improve quite a bit this year. It's not like.
You think Michigan State can be an 8-win team? Like, nobody really talks about them in that. I feel like there's a ceiling that we have in the Big Ten where it's obviously Penn State, Ohio State, Oregon, Michigan has kind of slipped. Then there's that next cluster where it is, I feel like Minnesota, who just beat somebody by 90 yesterday. Minnesota. I don't think Wisconsin's in that group anymore.
Nope.
Certainly.
But
where
Iowa is like,
anymore. Iowa might be backsliding.
That's why I say that,
Illinois
right?
is certainly in that group after last year. We didn't talk enough about Luke Altmaier.
They really did have a great win at Duke, 45-19.
Yeah. So, but I think, is Michigan State a chance to kind of leapfrog a couple teams to get into that Illinois category? Nebraska, I think, is going to get there.
That's why I'm saying, like, don't sleep on Michigan State yet, because there's not. It's exactly how you just described it, right? We know who the contenders are, and frankly, I think there's only a couple that could actually win the Big Ten, 3 to be exact: Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon, and then somebody's going to rise up. Somebody always does rise up from that next tier down that you don't expect, right? Illinois is kind of expected to. We didn't mention Indiana because they don't play anybody of note in September, but could they be somebody you're not expecting to? I guess is what I'm saying. Could emerge. Like, you expect Illinois to be good this year. You wouldn't be totally surprised by Indiana anymore, but Michigan State, I'm gonna be keeping an eye on them because I feel like that was the first game since Jonathan Smith got there that it was like, oh yeah, that's a Jonathan Smith offense right there, right? That's the Aiden Childs that a lot of people thought should be starting as a true freshman at Oregon State a couple years ago.
Before we get to our shout outs, let me ask you this right now. It's obviously early September. Do you feel like Michigan State will end up being the better team than its arch rival in Ann Arbor?
I'm not. No, I'm not gonna. Well, maybe, but I'm not going there yet. I
I'm getting a
mean,
maybe out of you. Just take a swing.
not. No, I mean, I think that depends on did Michigan State just beat a. I mean, it was not like it was double overtime, right? So
Yeah.
if it turns out Boston College is just not very good, right? I mean, then no, I don't feel like I can say that yet. But um, that wouldn't be. It wouldn't be totally surprising. I mean, I think we all just kind of assumed Michigan would be a lot better um, because they have a quarterback now. We think because they upgraded some positions around him. But as you said, like, well, if the offensive line's still not very good, then I don't know that Michigan can be much better than an 8-4 type of team again.
All right, let's get to our shout outs. What do you got, Stu?
I was gonna say Army, but you kind of gave them their due earlier. So why don't I go with, I will always have a soft spot for the Ohio Bobcats. My one of the school I frankly probably would have gone to if Northwestern had caught on to me when they should have. That I'm actually not that smart. Um, yeah, they almost beat Rutgers in the first game. And so, and I predicted this one before the season. You could kind of see it. They hosted West Virginia in Athens. They beat them 17-10. They completely shut down Rich Rod's offense. They broke like a 4-decade drought and won the MAC last year. Then Tim Albin like left the day after the game to go to Charlotte. I guess he really wanted to lose 20-3 to Bill Belichick. But they promote Brian Smith, and looks like they could win the MAC championship again. Like that was a really nice win for them.
Hmm. All right, Stu, my shout out is going to be a name for most people are never probably heard of, but it is a loyal Audible listener. So 5 years ago, the football coaches convention is in San Antonio. I'm at a bar, and a guy comes up to me and just says, "Hey, I'm a huge fan of the Audible, and I listen to it on my commute to work all the time." And so he is the head coach of a powerhouse football program in Texas at Denton Guyer. They produced a ton of big time players. And I think at one point Max Olson was with me, and I was like, I think I brought Max into this to be like, "Hey Max, I just want you to hear this." Just because like, it always surprises me when we run into fans of the show, right? And so, but anyway, we developed a connection, and at some point one of his quarterbacks is Jackson Arnold, and Jackson Arnold obviously went over to Oklahoma, and I think had heard me mention John Mateer somewhere along the way, and he said, John Mateer, we played against him. He's from Little Elm, which was a really struggling high school program in the same district as Denton Guyer, and he said, I would. And again, Mateer's story is, even though he was in a hotbed for football recruiting in Texas, the only offer he had was Central Arkansas. He was going to go to FCS Central Arkansas, and Reed Heim, along with a handful of other coaches in his conference, high school coaches, were like, they were telling other college recruiters, "You need to recruit this guy. He's pretty special." And the irony of all ironies is obviously Jackson Arnold really struggled. He ended up transferring. Obviously now he's at Auburn and seems like he's, on to better things there. But the guy who ended up replacing his guy was John Mateer, the one who he was calling college coaches, "You need to go recruit this guy." And so, credit to, hats off to Reed and some of the other guys in his league who were looking out for somebody they thought was really good, who is really, really good. And we'll see how it's going to play out for Oklahoma. Whether he's the next Baker Mayfield or not, there's definitely a lot of similarities in terms of under-recruited, really successful guy with a ton of moxie who got overlooked in the recruiting process, found his way to Oklahoma. Now, whether Mateer wins a Heisman or not remains to be seen, but I wouldn't at all be surprised if he ends up in New York after, some of the way he plays.
I guess it's not totally surprising that that somebody would come up to you at a coaches convention and say they listen to the Audible. What's the most random, hey, I love the Audible encounter you can remember?
The most random is actually Big E, who's a WWE superstar, who's the former Iowa defensive lineman, and he's super personality and engaging. And so we had a dinner a year ago, maybe it's 2 years ago. We're in Iowa City, and we had a long table for our Friday night dinner the night before Big Noon, and Biggie was there because he was going to be on the show. Rob Stone, huge pro wrestling fan, and I was sitting at the other end of the table. And so I might have got introduced to him. At the end of the night, he came up to me and he was like, "Hey, huge fan of the Audible, or whatever." And I just remember thinking, man, like this guy is like got great people skills because he just BS'd me into trying to say he liked our podcast, which I'm like, there's no way this guy's listening to our show. And Stu, I know you're not a pro wrestling guy, but like
Nope.
we met him, yeah, Chris Vanini, who is a huge pro wrestling guy, I think had brought him over at I forgot what media days, or probably Big 12 last year.
Oh yeah, I
And
met him.
yeah, and so it just like it's really really cool when you meet people, whether they're famous or just diehard college football fans who are loyal listeners to the show. And hopefully you guys are out there on YouTube as we're trying to expand our show. We certainly feel like it's a much better show now that we brought Ralph in here, Ralph Russo, because I think his perspective is really smart and reasonable and in a lot of ways unique in that. So that's all I got, Stu.
Yeah, Ralph will be back with us on Tuesday, where we will probably poke holes in his AP ballot, his latest AP ballot. And I don't know, shout out to Trader Joe's. They continue to be such a great supporter of ours. I hope you guys are stocking up there. And you can send your email questions to theaudiblepod@gmail.com. And hey, if you haven't already, if you're listening to this, but you want to subscribe, go to YouTube, subscribe to Audible Show. That's the handle there, and we will see you next time.